Okay, good evening, everyone. And thank you very much for joining us. My name is Matt Yancik, and I'm the founder and the head game master of Manufactured Myth and Legerdemain. Welcome to our first episode of many, I do hope, of Roleplayer with 1,000 Faces. So it's a show in which I plan and hope to dedicate to educating, informing, and maybe even enlightening you, the role player, about creators and the creative process and gaming in general. So for the next hour or so, you may have noticed someone beside me here in the chat. So for the next hour or so, we're very fortunate to have with us my first role playing celebrity. So I'm very nervous right now. I'm meeting a role playing celebrity, none other than Sean K. Reynolds, who is joining us from Monte Cook Games. And he's here to talk a little bit about what's going on at MCG. Hint, they've got a Kickstarter that's ending here coming up really soon, as well as share some of his gaming knowledge and gaming experiences. So Sean has, and he can correct me if I'm wrong here, but Sean's been in the RPG industry for quite a while, and his beginnings, I believe, go all the way back to TSR, as a matter of fact. And that's like major respect. Like I remember like the red box, yellow box, all of that stuff. I just cannot believe that I'm talking to somebody that worked at TSR. But Sean, thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me. So how are you doing today?
I'm good, Matt. Thanks for having me on your show. I appreciate it, and I appreciate being your first interview guest.
I'm very nervous right now.
Don't
It
be
could.
nervous. Don't
This
be
is
nervous.
where it's like in Back to the Future Part Two, where like Doc Brown is explaining the two time streams, and it's the time stream's going to either go like more interviews or it's going to diverge and go to like never again. So we'll see what happens. So I was hoping for those folks watching at home. I'm sure a lot of people out there know who you are, but could you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do at MCG? So I was looking at your game designer credits over at MCG, and I kind of get the feeling that despite your one title, it feels like you wear many hats.
Yeah, we're a small company, so there is a bit of blend here and there. But at MCG, my primary job is I am a designer and a developer. And designer means I'm the person who writes the words that show up in the books. As a developer, it means I look at the manuscripts from other people on the team and give critiques and suggestions on how they can be made better. That is basically what I did also when I was at Paizo working at Pathfinder. And to a lesser extent, my time at Wizards of the Coast, I was mostly a designer, slight bit of development. But yeah, I've been designing stuff for various RPGs, including D&D and Pathfinder and all of the new and era games like Monte Cook Games produces since 96, I would say, 1996.
Wow. So wait a minute. So you've been in the industry like doing RPG stuff since 96. Like in all
Actually,
that time.
since 95 is when I started as the webmaster for TSR, but
Oh
96
wow.
is when I got my first design credit.
What was a webmaster like in 1995? Like did
It
you
was
have like a
weird.
special hat that like in a
No, just the regular hats. It was
oh,
weird because at the time, the owner of TSR didn't want us to have a website. And so we had a site on the America Online site. We had a section for TSR. Um, but like all the stuff that we needed to get out, like an FAQ, we didn't have a place for an FAQ because we didn't have a
hmm.
website. So I had a section on my personal website for an unofficial TSR FAQ. And that's where I dumped all the information where it's like, oh, here are the 20 or 30 questions I keep getting over and over again. But I can't
Right.
have an official FAQ because we don't have an official website. But hey, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, look over here.
This is going to
It's
sound
great
like a
fun.
silly question, but like they TSR didn't want you to have an online site?
The owner did not want us to have a website.
Oh, okay. Can I? Was there a reason behind that, or was that just sort of?
You know, it was a strange time, and she is an unusual person, and I really don't know her reasons. Uh, the good news is that when we eventually got a website when we kind of partnered up with Interplay when they were making D&D games. And they
Right.
said, we really should have some D&D website stuff. And they finally agreed, and we had a little TSR website hosted by Interplay for us. And
Oh,
then TSR got bought by Wizards of the Coast. Then I joined their web team, and they're like, "Yeah, we're just going to take and actually give you a website, and we'll go from there." It was a weird time to be working on the internet
yeah.
because it's all still so very very new.
Right.
And I got that job a year out of college, so it was a long time ago.
Well, I was going to say, like, in her defense, I think a lot of people, what was really interesting about that time is I distinctly remember, and I'm not even going to, I can't believe I'm saying this live on the air. I remember turning to someone who was applying for jobs through the internet and just saying, the internet is a fad. This is not going to last. And so in her defense, I was kind of thinking at the same time, and I don't know what it says about me, that now the internet being a fad has turned into me trying to host my own my own web show. But yeah, I think there were, from what I remember, there were a few creators that were kind of nervous about putting their IP like out on a site and all that stuff. So
yeah, there's always been resistance every time we have a new sort of technology. When we had VCRs, lots of companies objected to people being able to take shows off the TV so they could watch them later. And it was only when sales of video cassettes of movies skyrocketed and they realized, oh, we can actually make money on this. We're going to fully embrace this.
right.
But there's always that hesitation to get in on new technology.
Yeah, the moment you realize that you're going to be making money and not losing money is when everybody suddenly, switches gears and starts kind of getting into it. That's great, though. I mean, for you to start actually out doing, first of all, doing something involving the web in the mid 90s, I mean, that was like a prime time to sort of get. So if you came out of college, was this what you were doing in college, or were you doing something different and it just sort of turned into that?
I had gotten a degree in chemistry, and I was working on getting my teacher education certification. And I decided not to continue in my teacher education, and that left me having a lot of free time while I was still in college and I was an RA. Ended up tinkering around with the internet because it was a college and we had internet access. And then graduation time came up and I needed to get a job, and I applied for a webmaster job for a daughter company of Time Warner.
Oh, wow.
On their website under the big Time Warner,
Yeah.
the actual Time Warner website. And that was back when, we have 25,000 users on the interwebs was a big deal.
Right.
And after doing that for a year, I was very active in the TSR related chats on the message boards, not the message boards, what they call the news groups. Sorry.
Wow.
News groups. And when person who was handling internet stuff for TSR as like his second gig, like he had a main gig, and they said, "Oh, you know internet stuff. You can handle all this chat and the website or the AOL site." He finally convinced them to start an opening for an actual online coordinator position, and he put out the notice for it. I applied. I got an interview, did a phone interview, did an in-person interview, and during that interview, he's like, "Well, I have a few other candidates to look over, but you pretty much have this job if you want it." So I said, "Well, let me talk to my girlfriend." Talked to my girlfriend. 2 weeks later, yes, I was in. I was on my way driving cross country to Wisconsin.
Oh, wow. So just to do the web job, had you had any experience with RPGs before that, or was this kind of your entry point?
Oh, I've been playing D&D and other role-playing games since I was 10. So the fact that I knew about D&D and I was active in the news groups and such, that was just gravy on top of this. Like the idea of me, this kid who grew up playing D&D and Star Frontiers and stuff, suddenly working for TSR was just insane. Like they flew me out for that interview and like, "Oh, and here's the artist pit. Here's Jeff Easley." I'm like, "Oh," and here's Jeff Grubb. Here's Roger Moore. Oh, I'm just like, I know names. I have Dragon magazines with these people's names in them. It was pretty crazy. So being, the kid who grew up and got to work for the company that makes D&D was amazing. And then, 2 years later, I started actually writing stuff for D&D, which is, I feel very privileged and very lucky. It's just a weird kind of pinball path of how I got from a degree in chemistry to game designer.
And so when you had that degree, I mean, had you been planning on becoming a teacher originally? And so that was kind of like your path, but then you sort of fell onto this other path.
Yep.
Can I ask, is there a reason why maybe you were thinking about, had you been thinking about anything, obviously if you've been playing D&D since you were 10, you must, I mean, obviously we know this now in retrospect, you have a very creative mind and you're kind of like thinking about these ideas and you're throwing them out all the time. Um, had you just sort of said, okay, I'm going to set that aside and that's going to be my hobby and I'm going to try something practical? Or was it a case of where you thought maybe, because I'm thinking back to myself, and I graduated in 97, and I'm thinking back to myself and the idea of taking a job or seeking out a job in entertainment or RPGs or whatever. My parents supported me, but it wasn't something that was seen as very practical. So had you just sort of set that aside and decided I'm going to try to become a teacher and then
No, even in high school, I wanted to be a teacher. I had a really
oh
great AP chemistry teacher
yeah
for my first year was honors and second year was AP. His name was Mr. Stow. And he was really what convinced me that like teachers could be really fun and informative and like normal people and not this like distant sort of, I'm giving you wisdom from on high.
right
And so he inspired me to, go into teacher education. And it just so happened that as I finished up that part of my life and I was looking around for other work, that this job opportunity with a video game company as their webmaster fell into my lap. It's like, well, I need to pay the bills and
right
this is what to do it. So
right.
that just took off. A lot of my life is just kind of reacting to bizarre circumstances that I never would have anticipated and just rolling with it.
Right. But I think some of those, that can often be the best life, some ways, right? As long as, granted, if things work out. But I kind of feel like actually in some ways my life has been kind of similar to that. So what was it then when 10-year-old Sean K. Reynolds walks into a store, receives a gift, is over at someone else's home? I do know that in Stay Alive, you mentioned the satanic panic. What was your first experience when you kind of bumped into RPGs, and how did you start
It was
playing?
my cousin David. He was 2 years older. And
So, David, hold on. I'm writing this down for the satanic panic committee that I'm on. David,
oh, good.
look this up. Okay.
But he had the D&D basic box,
Mhm.
and he lived nearby within a bike ride's distance away, and so we just started to play some D&D. And actually, I was involved in a College for Kids program the previous summer, and one of the classes I took was a D&D class. So it was me and like 20 other kids playing D&D taught by a professor. And then just playing with my cousin David reinforced that, and then we started getting into the AD&D books, and that was the 1980s. We had our own little gaming group, and I was exactly the same age that the kids in the Stranger Things TV show were. And
Right.
so their experience was just like watching, reruns of my own memories, because these kids are like, in the basement, they're 10 to 12 years old, rolling dice, getting very excited about their wizards and dragons and stuff. That was me.
So do you think that your imaginative kind of endeavors here, like playing D&D, were they supported? I mean, did you know anything about that satanic panic stuff going on, or was it just above your head, or?
My parents were always very supportive of the choices that I made. I remember when I started playing, my dad said, well, I want to see what my son's hobby is. I want to see what he's getting into. And so he rolled up a character, and I ran him through some adventures and
That's
that
great.
sort of thing. Yeah. And he told my mom, this is nothing to worry about. And the way my mom always saw it was, well, let's see, he's not out doing drugs. He's not getting anybody pregnant. He's not committing crimes. So yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, right. That's like every parent's dream is for their son to or daughter to stay at home and just like kind of keep kind of a low profile and stay quiet, at least as far as getting into trouble goes. So then so you ended up you love D&D, you enjoy playing D&D, you go to college thinking, you have this feeling like, oh my goodness, I am going to become a teacher. And it sounds like you had some inspiring people that were inspiring you to sort of go this direction. You felt that inspiration, and then RPGs, the idea of working in this industry kind of at least peeled you away from that. Was there something in particular about, because at first you started doing the website design and things like that, but was there something that appealed to you about sort of steering yourself off in that direction?
Well, even in college, I moved away to go to college, and I didn't have a gaming group there. And there was some negative pressure from a couple of people. Like my original college roommate was like, "Oh, that's the devil." I'm like, "Dude, you like, get drunk every weekend and you've done coke. Why are you telling me about it?" But what I
Yeah.
really got into was doing online gaming in play by email.
Oh,
And
wow.
for a while, I hosted the official play by email FAQ guide on my website, or actually on my FTP site. So I
Mhm.
was already active in RPGs even before I was working as a webmaster. And that is what led me to being active in the news groups and actually getting into arguments with the TSR online guy about
Oh,
copyright infringement and what people could do in their home game and what people could share on FTP sites. Because at the
yeah.
time, TSR's perspective was, if it's written for D&D, we own it. And
Right.
that everybody now would agree that's completely ridiculous. So when the TSR online guy posted this job offering, uh, I applied just as a lark, thinking this is the guy that I've been butting heads with for the past 6 months.
Right.
And it turns out like I had exactly the qualities that he was looking for. It's like a person who's very familiar with the community, person who knows how to build a website, person who knows D&D. So I got the job. And it was just one of those things of, oh, I've gotten a job offer from this dream opportunity.
Yeah.
I just thought about it for a couple of days and said, yes, I absolutely have to do this. And that changed my life. I mean, here I
Yeah.
am 25 years later with all these books under my belt and all this experience in doing exactly that. Like there have been times where I've said it, I'm going to take a step back from doing RPG game design and work on other things, but I always come back to this just because I've been doing this since I was 9 or 10, and my brain is just trained to think of, oh, that'd be a cool idea for an adventure. Oh, that'd be a cool monster. That'd be a cool magic item. I can't stop myself.
Yeah. And so I was actually going to say then, what was it then? So if you were playing RPGs up until that point, and then you got thrown into the situation where you're suddenly working on the website, and then a couple of years later you have the opportunity to go in there and start doing like work. Was that writing work that you started with, or how did you first initially get involved with that?
So at the time, the TSR staff, the designers and editors, which were what we call the creative services department,
Hmm.
they did a party at Gen Con every year. And TSR paid for that by, they had an agreement with the owner that said, we're going to put out an adventure or like a collection of adventures. And we're going to donate our freelance design and freelance editing fees for the purpose of funding this party. And so in this particular year, I was friends with one of the editors on the Ravenloft line, Cindy Rice.
Oh, wow.
And she said, hey, you were really creative and you like this sort of stuff. Would you like to write one of these short adventures for a book that was going to be called Children of the Night Ghosts? I said, sure, I'll do that. And I wrote this ghost story about this little boy who'd been hit by a wagon, and he was like only able to say like a few things relating to like the immediate moments before he died, and you're trying to figure out this, why he was killed and who was responsible. And I donated my freelance for the designer party, and that was my first published credit. And then I started working on some things for the TSR organized play group, which is called the RPGA. I just did some short adventures tying into various D&D products there. And then when Wizards of the Coast bought TSR, by then I
Mm,
had 7 or 8 of these things under my belt, and there
right.
was a design position opening up, and they encouraged me to apply, and I did, and I got the job, and I was a baby designer.
That's awesome. That's like what a turn. And so how old were you at that point when around? Like how long had you been at TSR and
Let's see. Wizards of the Coast, well, 96, I was 25 when I got my
25?
first design credit. And then in 98, was when I became a designer. So I was 27.
Right. And so did you ever kind of like think about, well, my goodness, I went to school for something else and here I am doing this. Did you ever sort of look over fondly at maybe the other teachers in classrooms and think, I wish I could have returned to that? Or were you just like, you never look back and you were super happy for what you're doing?
Well, before I took the job at the video game company, I actually did a 6-week stint as a substitute teacher. And
Hmm.
so I basically got thrown in the deep end because that school had a teacher who retired early and they needed to finish
Yes.
out the first semester. So I'm like, all right, I'm teaching 5 classes and I'm writing their final. I'm giving them their grades. So it's like I did my trial by fire for doing teaching.
Yeah.
I like doing teaching. I've actually on my own done some game design classes, and I've mentored people for Paizo's RPG Superstar competition, which is an RPG design competition. And I've even done some brief stints with a local school that my girlfriend's son attends.
Awesome. Yeah.
I taught classes on adulting. Actually, late last year, we did a class on how to design a card game. So I definitely have that urge to teach, and I like
Yeah.
to talk to people in a teaching sort of way, in
Yeah.
an informal teaching sort of way. So
Right.
I have opportunities that I can do that don't require me to stop my full-time game design.
Well, I think, and we were kind of saying this before, but and this is exactly right. Teaching is a lot like so for those people listening along at home. I am also actually I am a teacher. I have been teaching for a while. I didn't take the path. I took the path more taken. Is that what I should be saying? According to the old poem. And I have been teaching, and I see so many parallels between teaching and game mastering. And I don't want to say too much because I actually, one of the reasons why I'm attracted to Monte Cook Games, and I've kind of made this joke before. The first time I opened up an MCG game, I kind of thought I was looking at a teacher's manual in a way, even the way that they're set up. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about perhaps what you brought from your teaching experience and into role playing, and maybe some of the parallels and maybe even some of the differences too.
Well, I mean, if you're a good teacher, is someone who can communicate well, like they have an outgoing bit of information that they need to communicate to their students. They understand the different ways that different people learn and retain information. They need to be open to questions and open to revising their lesson plan as situations change. You might have a student who's having a difficulty with a particular subject, and you have to come at it from a different way. You might have a student who doesn't want to be in that class, but they need it to graduate. And in a similar way, the game master is trying to present the information, this adventure or the world, and you have different players who have different needs and different reasons for role playing. Like there's the person who wants to do all the funny accents and say, "Oh,
Right.
hawk and prithee," and then there's a character, the
Yes.
player who just wants to be there to fight monsters. And there's the character who's just there because their significant other is playing and they don't want to feel like a third wheel, but they're trying to participate and they're still learning this. There's different levels of experience and different levels of interest. So there's a lot of parallels between teaching and being a game master. So I like to think that I bring that with me when I'm doing my writing and speaking to people about games. Because the hobby is very much one of those hobbies that you gain admission by word of mouth. Like you bring in other people by introducing a new player to your group. And without that influx of new people, our hobby will die out. Now, people have been saying doom and gloom about RPGs since I've been playing RPGs. It's like, oh, the game is dying, the history, the culture is dying. It's not. We just have new people coming in. Some people are reluctant to embrace the new people,
Yeah.
etc. But just the fact that we need to have people who are really good at game mastering, really good at playing, and really good at engaging new people and getting them involved is critical, in the same way that teachers need to have the passion for teaching. Otherwise, they're just going to have uninterested students who aren't interested in going on to other types of learning. So there's very strong parallels there. And my background also in chemistry, I have a degree in chemistry, has taught me logical thinking, how to present information in orderly steps so you can easily follow from one to the next. And I think that also is a strong parallel in presenting rules information. And can tell you point A, and once you understand A, then it can move on to point B and see how B builds on A, and then C builds on B. So yeah, there's a lot of interrelational stuff there. And for I and my fellow designers at MCG, I mean, we read a lot of crazy stuff, but I have a science degree, Bruce Cordell has a science degree, and so we both talk about really weird sciencey topics. Monty likes really crazy stuff about dreams and psychology, and Shauna's psychology as well. But we all have this love of the game, and we want to take this area of knowledge that we have and present it in a way that is a fun thing to play through as an adventure. So part of the key of that is learning how to speak to people through text. So they'll go, oh, this is awesome. I want to play this.
Yeah, and I think it's really funny because I kind of took a bit of a sabbatical from RPGs for quite a few years. They just sort of fell by the wayside for me. But maybe I don't remember how many years ago it was, but I started to get back into RPGs, and I sort of went back to the default setting for role players, and that's Dungeons and Dragons, and because it was something I was familiar with, and so I was playing D&D for quite a few years, and I was in my comic shop, my local shop. I actually, when I was living in Anchorage, so I used to live in Alaska, and I was up there, and I saw a copy of Numenera, and I was like, "What's this?" And I picked it up, and the moment I looked at it, the way that it was organized, the way that the pages were put together, and I was happy to find that this is just the theme of the entire product line that MCG seems to release. It's all very organized, and it's designed in a way that allows easy entry for basically anyone. And it's a very impressive thing. I think for those of you out there who perhaps have never maybe taught before, the idea of accessing different students and different learning styles and still retaining that kind of core meaning and that core meat of is a really difficult skill. And I am always impressed by what I see from MCG games. I was wondering, I know you just, relatively speaking, released Stay Alive, and I saw in the forward there that it was your first like big thing that you kind of did on your own. What was that I was going to kind of ask you about the collaboration process, but now I'm sort of wondering, what was it like when you're sort of sitting there and you've got a blank page, and from the beginning you have to be like, okay, well, Monty just told me I can write the book. I gotta show Monty something. What do you do to get all of that out, and then you sort of parse out what you as maybe as a designer might say is like, okay, this is worth it, this is too much, this should be a supplement, this should be something else. How do you do that?
Well, I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and so this skill of concepting a book is something that I've developed over time, and I've had the luxury of working with some really, really talented game designers who have a bit more experience than me and have been willing to take me under their wing. But really what it comes down to for a book like Stay Alive is it's a book about horror, and I've really enjoyed the horror genre. And as a person who wants to run horror games and wants to play in horror games, I have to look at it from both perspectives of, if I'm running a horror game, what sort of tools do I need mechanically to make this a cool experience that the game doesn't already have? What sort of tools do I need narratively to make the play experience for the players fun and exciting? And then for the player side, it's going to be like, well, what cool gizmos can I have for my character? What cool options do I have that are either like permanent parts of my character or objects like magic items? What can I do in a horror game that gives me an advantage or increases my chance of survival? Or just because horror games characters often die, are there options for, can I sacrifice myself in such a way that helps somebody else survive?
Right.
And you really got to look at it from all the different perspectives and just throw all those ideas in a bucket and then sort out those ideas into ways that make sense in a chapter by chapter and a part by part basis. So there's a whole section on new rules, and there's a section on player options, and there's a section that's the mini setting, and there's a section that is kind of just going through all the various creatures of horror, like, oh, let's do 2 pages on mummies, 2 pages on killer clowns, 2 pages on vampires, 2 pages on werewolves, and just talk about, here's cool stuff you can do in werewolves, here's still cool stuff you can do with vampires, and just think on all the experience that you have on that and figure out, what can I filter that down to fit this space? And I'm sure that I could have written more and more and more for Stay Alive, but I had, 20 or 30 different genres to cover, and so I had to limit myself to just 2 pages on each of those. But maybe someday there'll be a Stay Alive too, and I'll write 4 pages on it.
Yeah, why not? I mean, what I liked about Stay Alive is what you're doing is I felt like it was very helpful for someone, because obviously you're building it for the Cypher system, which is a generic rule set, right? And then on top of that, what you want to play, what you're doing with that is you're giving your players a way to sort of structure and a framework on which to build on top of. And then the issue, and that's one of the things which I have sort of noticed. If you look at people in general, they have an easier time grasping those solid sort of concepts, like, okay, you roll the die in this situation or that situation, but then putting the genre on top of it, I think is maybe something that can be tough. And what I like about Stay Alive is that you actually break down, say, the genres, you break down different sorts of characters, and you give them to the game masters who maybe might not, know exactly how to, may love horror, but have never really thought about it so in depth. And so they have a basic kind of framework from which to sort of build a thematic setting, a training wheels, perhaps, if you will. And I appreciated that about the book and about the cipher system in general. And that's something I think you were sort of saying before. I think it's something that's really important because it makes the game accessible to a lot of people. I love certain types of game, but I think it's a shame that people are not more into deciding what they really want to play, what genres they want to do. And I sort of feel like sometimes it's like if you eat a Big Mac or pizza every single day for every meal, it's not very healthy. And I feel like it's healthier to sort of cross genres and experience different things. So I guess my question is, how long was that percolating in your head? Or was that like an assignment? Did Monty go, all right, Sean, you work for me. Let's go. Here's your next assignment. There you go. Come on, clock's ticking. Or was that something where you're all sort of at a meeting and you're like, we need a horror book? Or how did that come about?
So Monty would totally say that as a joke.
Let's go.
I've known him for over 20 years now. We're friends. We've gamed together. I've crashed at his house when I was visiting in town.
That is a friend.
Yes. So our entire company is all remote. We all work from home. We're a distributed office all over the country. But to kind of foster some teamwork and just give us that experience of working in person with people once or twice a year when there isn't a pandemic going on, we have a summit where we'll meet up in one city and we'll basically have 3 days of just talking about the next year's plans and planning the Kickstarter. And a lot of it is just we'll get together and play games. And one of the recent summits, let's see, this is 2020. I think it was like late 2018, the fall summit. We got together and we're like, okay, we're going to go and do this game or this something called Your Best Game Ever. We're going to Kickstart it. We'll throw in the revised cipher system rulebook on top of that because we had just finished doing the Numenera books and it was time to update cipher system with the advantages we had learned for that. And then we said, well, we have 4 designers, Monty, Shauna, Bruce, and Sean. What if we had stretch goals of each one of us doing our own genre book of a genre that we would like? And it's like, I call dibs on horror, and Bruce is like, I call dibs on science fiction. And so that's what we did. And so Stay Alive was the second stretch goal for that. And I said, I'm going to write a horror book. And Bruce started working on his first. But the really cool thing is that Monty has, from the very start, said to all of us, although Bruce did his book first, and you can parallel his structure if you want, we want each of these books to be the best for what they are. And so they don't have to be exactly like each other. Like if Bruce has 4 chapters on rules and 3 chapters on setting and this and that, the other books don't have to do that. So I'm like, cool, I'm going to do something like that, but I'm going to go off on this crazy tangent and talk about vampires and mummies and a 2x2 page benefit sort of thing. And I was just given free rein on what I want to do for it. Like he said, give me an outline so I can look it over and see if there's anything crazy in there. Like, Sean, you shouldn't have, 24 pages on killer clowns and only 2 pages on vampires.
Right.
But other than that, it was just pretty much, yes, I'm doing a horror book and I can do whatever I want with it. And Shauna doing the book on fairy tales and such.
Yeah. That one's, they've all got me kind of excited. And I was wondering, though, I had a little question about the horror aspects, because the horror game, like consent in gaming right now is like a really big and important thing that's been going on. And I think that a lot of it was very much thanks to recently you guys actually published something very concrete where you have like a checklist to go through. And I think that's super important thing. Again, as a teacher, to have these tools available for those people that want them and feel they need them, I think this is really essential. How was it approaching the horror game at all? Did you feel like, okay, I'm getting into some sticky territory here? Or how did you kind of modulate, perhaps? Was there anything you thought, okay, maybe I'm not going to put this in the book, or I'm going to tone something down, or anything like that?
Well, originally, like the consent topic was 10 pages that I had written for Stay Alive.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Oh,
Monty had taken a look at it and he said, you know what? This is an important enough topic that we should just take
yeah.
this out, make it its own PDF. We had Shauna come in and write some more based on her experience with, she's got a psychology degree. And then we came up with a checklist. And so we made it its own thing. And so rather than it being just a section of Stay Alive, we're like, now we have this consent to gaming thing. And then this section in Stay Alive could focus specifically about horror. Because even as a person who enjoys horror as a horror genre, there's stuff that makes me uncomfortable. Like
Yeah,
I don't,
sure.
I love animals. I would not want to watch a movie where somebody was torturing an animal, for example. I know people who are arachnophobes and they don't want to see a movie with scary spiders. We talk about that in Stay Alive, and that there's good scary and there's bad scary. And like, if you go see a horror movie and you're expecting something like, a slasher movie like Friday the 13th, that's an entirely different sort of situation than, oh, here's a really uncomfortable scenario where there's like some blatant racism going on. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
it's fine to be, I am all down for this one sort of type of horror and not wanting to have this other one at all. And so that's where the consent aspect comes in. It's like, you know what, you need to make sure that you as a GM are comfortable in the topics that are being discussed and that your players are comfortable in those topics as well. Because the idea of getting together for a role-playing game is to have fun. Even if it's a horror game, you expect your characters are going to die or some of them is going to be maimed. You want to have good scary. You don't want to have bad scary. And that's an important thing. It just like, it's a matter of respect for the people that you're playing with.
Yeah, I really, I think it's wonderful. Like that publication, I think it's a really good thing to put into concrete terms, because it's something that I had never really thought about, and I never really thought about the way I would articulate it necessarily, particularly growing up as, being a teen playing, RPGs and then into college and all that. You just sort of build a lot of times on what you know. And so the idea of that in particular, I think is a really good one and a really smart one. And I think that what I like about it is that I think that what you've done is sort of pushed things in directions. Again, I always think in teachers' terms, but you're pushing the medium, you're pushing the RPG kind of like the whole area into new directions and really making space to open it up for many, many things. And again, it goes back to like the idea of having a generic rule set. But I really like that, because what it implies is, to me as a teacher, you can play just about anything you want. You just have to make sure that everybody is kind of on the same page and understands what's going on, and that everyone is informed and comfortable, and you're open and honest, which is something that it's the sort of atmosphere that you try to create in teaching, is an atmosphere where people can make mistakes, be corrected on them, and nobody has to feel bad about it, but they can kind of grow and learn from it, I think. And that's a wonderful thing that sets up, I think. Sorry, I went off on a soliloquy. But I was wondering, do you consider yourself to be more of a player or a game master? And, well, you can sort of tell me.
Well, when I was younger, in my teens, I was usually the game master. I was always coming up with new worlds and new adventures, and that people were always happy to have a GM who's willing to go and take on. Oh, it's really hard work being a GM.
Yeah.
But as a person who just can ramble on for any topic for a good number of hours, it was never really a difficult thing for me. And then
I totally know that feeling.
And then I kind of stopped when I was in college because there's no group. I played online, and again, I started playing in a play-by-email game online, and then started up my own play-by-email game. So I was kind of crossing both streams there. And then I went to work at TSR, and the idea of me being the new guy is like, oh, I'm going to run a game for Monte Cook and Bruce Purdown.
Whatever.
Like, no, I'm going to just sit there. I'm going to play and like see what everyone else is doing. And so there was a good 2 or 3 years of that. And then, we moved to the Wizards of the Coast, and Monty started doing his his Primal game, which was the prequel to Talus.
Yeah.
And Chris
Oh.
Perkins was running his ongoing game, which was just really crazy, great fun. I mean, I was playing 2 or 3 games a week at Wizards of the Coast, so it was a great time. And then only in the past probably 5 years at MCG have I started to do more GMing. A lot of them are one-shots, just because it's like, oh, we need to play test something. Or I'm running a game at a convention for, some Kickstarter backers or something like that.
Right.
But actually, in the past year now, I started running a Numenera game for my girlfriend, her son, and a couple of my gamer friends from Wizards of the Coast. And then that game transitioned into a Talus game when I needed to start playtesting some Talus stuff for Cypress.
Yeah.
So I have a long history of being a GM, even a longer history of being a player, but I guess I've osmosis absorbed enough GM tips from the people who are like really big in the industry who preceded me that I'm comfortable running games for just about anybody, whether that's a stranger, online, in person, or for a group of close friends.
I think that's actually like, what a way to sort of get seasoned in the ways of game mastering. I mean, I was sort of picturing the same thing, because I was thinking earlier, like, I wonder if at TSR they must have played like weekly games or something. Like, how is he going to come in, and is he going to run a game, or is he just going to sit there like I would, wide-eyed, and just be like, okay, great, oh, good, what's a hit point? Wait a minute, hold on, let me check this out. What do you think? Was there someone that was a particular influence on you as far as maybe game mastering, playing, designing goes during that time, from transitioning from like being a player to a game master maybe later on? Is there someone that like changed your style, and maybe how so?
Oh, I don't know if I could honestly say whether they changed my style, just because I had such a long break between jamming and actively jamming again, but I definitely learned a lot from Monte and from Chris. Monte took me under his wing at TSR, and he and Bruce, actually, Bruce ran a playtest of an adventure called The Gates of Firestorm Peak, and that was the first game that I played in at TSR, was a playtest. So I was like in their game room, Monty's house, and Bruce was there, and that was just a really cool introduction to these really cool people that are like my really good friends now. But Monty has always done such a good job of just giving you narrative choices in the story and kind of doing a yes and sort of situation of your player's going to try something weird. All right, let's see where this goes.
Right.
And giving you opportunities to do things that aren't all about just doing damage and numbers and math. It lets you make creative choices for your character. Chris Perkins, the same way, lets you make mistakes and then come back from them. He always has 2 or 3 interesting ideas in the background that he can just insert. If the players take a weird left turn, he has contingencies available. And Monty is growing more and more focused on narrative design over time, because he and I worked on 3rd edition. 3rd edition is a very rules-heavy sort of game, and I worked on Pathfinder, also rules-heavy. Then I was a developer on Numenera, the original Numenera, and that was just like a mind-blowing thing for me. Like, wow, you can have all these cool things that I'm used to playing in an RPG without having so much rules baggage and having to nitpick every precise numerical value of things. And so that was kind of like it got the ball rolling for me to be ready to give up a lot of those hard mechanics that 3rd edition Pathfinder had and move on to something that's more light for the GM, so the GM can focus on story.
Yeah, so that's the thing that I love about the Cypher system in general, is I suppose that I need a lot of my learning style is I need a lot of hard repetition in order to learn a lot of rules. And so I can sit there and I can learn the rules for a game, but I would really rather spend my time, thinking of a cool story based on something that my player said last week. And, so I could spin it off and really make it look like I'm some brilliant guy, but the player suggested it, and steal it. And so what I appreciate about that is feeling freer to go towards that narrative style. And I'm also just want to say it's amazing, like the way that you drop names that are like so casually that I'm like, oh my God, you're like Bruce Cordell, and there's Monte Cook and Chris. And I'm like, Chris, who's Chris? He hasn't said a last name for Chris. It couldn't be Chris Perkins, could it? And then sure enough, it's Chris Perkins. So that is just humbling to me, but that's
it's funny because I don't mean that to be name dropping. I just like I used to have the habit that I would just say their names, and I realized that sometimes people wouldn't know what I was talking about. But that's a funny anecdote was My sister is a gamer. She actually, I left for college and she joined my old gaming group and they taught her D&D. And so for a while she lived out in Washington State and she was actually a player in Chris Perkins's game and I think in Monte Cook's game. And there was a point where I was telling a story and I'm like, oh, so my friend Monte Cook. And she's like, yes, I know Monty. I've gamed with Monty. You don't need to call him Monte Cook. He's just Monty.
Just so you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like when I'm talking to my mother. Who's Monte Cook? Well, if you say he's a good guy, then I'm sure he is, Matthew. He's a great designer? I'm sure he is, Matthew. I'm sure he is. You have a stream tonight? Oh, I'm going to be very interested in watching that, Matthew. So, yeah, I kind of know. And as a teacher, I was imprecise in my use of language. I shouldn't have said name dropping. Name dropping implies that you're trying to sound like you're super cool. You just were actually in the situation where you know these people, and so that's just want a point of order there on that. So let me ask you then, how has all of this sort of influenced what you're working on now? So we have this sort of portrait of you up until like the present. And I know that right now the big thing coming down the pipeline and you've got the Kickstarter going in a few days, is Heroes of the Cypher system. So I was just wondering how has this like informed what you're doing with Heroes?
Well, I mean, so here's the Cypher system. The main thing that I'm going to be working on for it is it's a Cypher system source book for superheroes. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I grew up doing fantasy. I prefer fantasy over sci-fi. I'm fine with sci-fi, but I prefer fantasy. But close second for me behind fantasy is superheroes. I read tons of comics when I was younger. I played the Marvel Superheroes Adventure game.
Oh.
My friend Jason and I played that game so much, and I made like a bunch of house rules for various things. So I was already doing game design for superheroes back then. I did the superheroes rules for the Alternity game. Yeah, it's
really
like,
okay.
Yeah, supers is just so much in my blood. And I was telling my friends at the Cypher Unlimited podcast that like I want to be able to go through the official handbook of the Marvel Universe from the 1980s and look at every character and say, okay, can I build this character with the Cypher system rules? No, I need to develop this power. Okay, I'm going to design a new power. I want to look through the old Marvel Superheroes Adventure game from TSR through the Ultimate Powers Guide and just say like, is this power in the game? Yes, no. Is this power in the game? Yes, no. And then look at all the narrative tools that are necessary for a superhero game. And throw those out there in the same way that I did for Stay Alive and just kind of deconstructing the genre and putting it into terms that a GM and a player can handle it in nice bite-sized chunks. I'm going to do the same thing for the Cypher system for superheroes. One of the things, for example, one of the weaknesses of the Cypher system is that characters, PCs and NPCs work very differently. And it's hard to do a situation where you have one PC acting against another PC. But like one of the most common tropes of superhero genre is a new super shows up and somebody assumes that they're a bad guy, and so they end up fighting, and then finally like, no, let's go fight Juggernaut. We're on the same side.
Right.
So I want to have like more information about how to handle PC versus PC interaction because that is something that happens in the game. That's just an example of one of the many things that superheroes do. You have various different kinds of team ups. You have different ways of handling setbacks, handling damage, how their power surges work. I mean, there's just so much that's specifically for superheroes. Sorry, I have a cat who's trying to get on my lap here.
No problem at all. I was just thinking in my head, I feel left out because in every single like interview I've seen with you, a cat has made an appearance at one point or another. I was starting to think it was me, so I feel better.
No, it's not you. He just woke up from a nap. He's deciding whether he's going to step on the keyboard before he comes to. But yeah, so that's the main book. Here's a Cypher System Kickstarter is this called Claim the Sky. That's the generic supers book. We're also doing one called First Responders, which
that sounds cool.
Take on heroes, because in this modern world where we've got a pandemic, it's not about people flying around in capes punching supervillains. It's about people working in labs, trying to find the virus to fix make a vaccine, or people dealing in overcrowded hospitals, or there's fire responders, firefighters, and whether people like there's wildfires raging in California and Australia. Like those people are putting their lives on the line, and they are heroes. And we don't really have anything like that in our
Yeah.
game. And so the idea of first responders is, let's create a source book where you can play a firefighter, an EMT, or a researcher, that sort of thing. And you're presented with a scenario of, hey, we've got an outbreak of this, or there's a fire in this building, or there are people who need to be rescued in this avalanche, that sort of thing. And your characters are doing heroic actions in those sort of situations. And because it's a Cypher System book, it'll work with any Cypher System game. So you could actually have a situation where, like, to take the first Avengers movie as an example, we've got the Qatari having this invasion, all these buildings and stuff are being attacked and destroyed. You could play one session where you have the superheroes fighting all the Qatari. You could play a different session where you're playing people on the street who are regular, like EMTs, trying to get people out of the collapsing building, or treating injuries, or cordoning off areas because there's too many hostiles and that sort of thing. That's what first responders is all about. It's about giving you those ground level heroes who are just regular people. And one of the cool things is that it's meant to be sort of a more a posse sort of situation. Like, on this game, you might play a firefighter, but the next game, we're going to need another EMT. So you're going to have like a team of people that are your posse of characters, and you're going to play different ones in different scenarios, but you'll advance them all so that you'll still be able to have your character team as a whole getting better. But it's also meant to be very modular in that if you're the sort of group who only has, one session every couple of months, and you have a hard time keeping a continuity from session to session, it's meant to be a whole bunch of one shots that you can string together. And ideally, we would love it if we could have a situation where a bunch of people who are actual firefighters or EMTs are able to sit down and play a game like this, and then if they have an emergency call, they can just drop it and run off, and then come back and resume it.
Right, and keep going. That's actually what was going to be my next question, was how it sort of interlocked with Cypher System, because the way that you were describing it, it kind of sounded like it could run parallel to, or you can run it independently of Cypher. Like, let's say that I'm like, I want to run just this, and I can run a campaign, say, or I can run one shots with it for the book.
Yeah, I mean, it includes. It doesn't have all the core rules, so it's a small book. It's
right.
only the system rule book or the Cypher System Rules Primer, which is the slimmed down version. But it is basically containing like a mini setting of, hey, here's a disaster scenario number 1, here's a fire scenario number 2, here's a medical scenario, that sort of thing. So you could just run those things as a campaign, because it's basically the real world.
Yeah,
you could just be putting this in the real world. You don't have to come up with all this elaborate backstory for it.
I love the idea. I mean, I am actually running a game right now, and it's an historic roleplay, and it takes place during the pandemic 100 years ago. And the funny thing is, I sat down with my players beforehand, and we were trying to sort of work out how we can run this sort of fantasy horror game set against something so serious. And one of the kind of core tenets that we came up with was that we didn't want to step on the toes of the people that were, doing the actual work back then. So we kind of made an agreement, like, the pandemic's not going to be, related to maybe something that's going on with the monsters, and it's not going to be something that's curable by magic. We're going to sort of let it be its own thing so that we can treat that sort of issue with some respect. And what was funny is when I saw the Kickstarter for this, I was like, oh my gosh, if I had known, I could have waited and used this in the background or something. We are running it under Cypher, but I think it's a wonderful idea. Was there besides the fact that this whole year has just been so dependent on first responders, is there something that was the genesis for this? Were you all, again, sitting around at a summit and said, why don't we do a book about normal people? Everyday heroes?
Well, I mean, we had wanted to do supers. Like, we've had people asking us, are you going to do a supers genre book? It's just, we only did the original 4 from that Kickstarter because there were 4 designers on the design team. And so came up with this idea of this superhero related Kickstarter. That is my cat yowling in the background, if you can hear him.
I feel validated.
And then on top of that, we had this pandemic, and we wanted to go and show these people who were doing all this hard work that we do appreciate what they're doing, and that they are saving lives. And so that was a natural fit to look at heroes from two different sides of the genre. One, which is super fantastic, I can fly, I can shoot lasers out of my eye, versus no, I'm literally like, I have my hands in somebody's chest cavity, compressing their heart to keep them alive.
Right.
And in the middle, we also have the book that is primarily going to be by Bruce, which is called The Origin, which is kind of more of a low key, like superheroes are brand new and there's like government organizations trying to control them and you're keeping your power secret, as opposed to like the big top one where it's just more like the Marvel Cinematic Universe where like, yes, we know Captain America was around in World War II and now we've got these other heroes. So it's three different ways of running heroes. And like horror, I mean, superheroes is multiple genres within there because you've got
Right.
high action heroes like the Avengers, but you also have like more noir sort of stuff like Jessica Jones, and you've got the street level hero like Daredevil, and you also have cosmic level heroes like the Silver Surfer, and those are all different sort of things. And so the superhero book is going to have to talk about how to handle each of those sort of subgenres within superheroes.
I love that. I think that's a really great idea. And just to let you know, if we were playing a game right now and you mentioned Daredevil, I would have given you XP for that. I would have given you XP. It's a very strange occurrence that today I'm not wearing any Daredevil shirts at all because I have so many, but I always appreciate a Daredevil reference. Well, I know we're coming up on the hour, and I just sort of wanted to maybe ask you one final question. And no pressure, but I was just wondering if you could perhaps maybe give us a little bit of advice on one of the things that I had kind of struggled with on my own prepping is prepping for a game, and then when I get into the game, a lot of my players will throw me a curveball or seven, and if they're out there watching right now, you know who you are. I was wondering if you might give us any advice or tips or something on prepping smarter and not harder, perhaps.
I think it's two things. One is, oh, I have cat on keyboard. Hey, here he is.
Oh my goodness.
The first one is, if you have a path in mind for where the story is going to go that session and the players change the direction of where they're going to go, you can move those obstacles into their path. So if you have like a dungeon sort of adventure planned over in this way, they end up going off this way, move that dungeon to where they are, or throw a big old clue. Like if there's a dungeon and then instead they decide to go chase these bandits, when they defeat the bandits, have the bandits have like a map to the dungeon. They're like, oh, well, now we've got another reason to go do this sort of thing. Or reskin that dungeon as the bandits' lair. Maybe the bandits are being fronted by a group of monsters that can't go about in town. They need some human intermediaries to do that. It gives you an opportunity to use the stuff that you already have prepared, and it's in the direction where the players are going. The other is just feel free to blatantly steal from everything that you've ever read. Whether it's a TV show, a comic book, or another adventure, like you can pull a map out of some random ass adventure for a game that isn't even the game that you're playing, and just use that, whether it's a town map or a warehouse map or a dungeon map, a plot from an old TV show or a movie. And one of the great examples I like to use is my brother-in-law, J.D. Weicker, ran a feng shui game that he set in Tijuana. And the first session was they're all in Tijuana and they're in this cantina. And the doors of the cantina open and there's a ghost there. And they're like, whoa, there's a ghost. And the ghost points at some guy in the corner and says, avenge me. And the ghost disappears. And they go and talk to the guy in the corner. It turns out the ghost is of the sheriff. And the man in the corner is the sheriff's son. And there's this whole investigation going on where, the sheriff was apparently killed. And the sheriff's wife is now like dating the sheriff's brother, and all this stuff is going on.
English teacher and
they tell this whole story, and this goes on for like 6 or 8 weeks, and then they finish the last session, and it's like all this that happens, and then JD says, and that is the story of Hamlet.
Yes.
And because they take, they're playing feng shui, which is not something you think of Shakespearean, and they're set in Tijuana again, which is not anything remotely related to Europe or even where you might set a feng shui game. And just by flipping those two genres, it completely floored them. They had no idea. Related to that is like the Wheel of Time. Like that whole story The premise of the Wheel of Time is that these stories have been told over and over again, and it's just part of a cycle. And related to that is the Battlestar Galactica TV show from like a decade ago. They're sacred scrolls, like the religion of the people in the show. It says all this has happened before and all this shall happen again. So even if your players kind of catch on to what's going on, it's still a new thing. It's still them getting a chance to play in through that. I talk about that a bit in Stay Alive, where it's okay to have a horror game where it's like, hey, we're playing through Nightmare on Elm Street, except you are the teenagers who are having all the nightmares. And now will you survive against Freddy Krueger? It's like, just let them, if they recognize it, that's fine. Just twist something, but go ahead and use that plot, because we've all heard those stories. You can make it work. Plug in something else. Now it's Freddy Krueger with robots, or it's a fantasy story with a mind flayer instead of a dragon. Just cram in something in that player's path, twist a couple of details, and run with it. And you know what? It's okay to take a break. Just be like, oh, you're turning left? I need to go heat up some pizza and go spend like 5 minutes in the kitchen thinking about where you want this to go and how you can take that into account. And then come back and be like, all right, here we go. This is what happens.
I love it. Thank you very much for that. It's funny, like I don't feel like I'm cheating anymore. I feel like I've been freed. Thank you very much for validating my own methods. It's funny, like I think that that idea of the break, though, I think that that's actually something kind of important. And it's funny. It's the teacher in me, when you said that kind of, a flag went up, and I said, wait a minute. Yeah. I mean, I know my students need it, and I know I need it as a teacher from time to time. And teaching, you're teaching for 45 minutes, and then you take a break. But with a game, you may be teaching or you may be running for a couple hours, sometimes 3 without a break. I think that's really important. And I think if you have your, obviously if you're playing with a group of players that trust you, and that if you trust them, I think that they're going to be more than willing to give you that time. Well, those are very wise words. Sean, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I had a billion more questions to ask you. I really do appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight. I wish you the best of luck with the Kickstarter. Can you tell us what I know I don't have to wish Monte Cook Games good luck with the Kickstarter. And but can you tell us when the deadline is for that?
It is this Friday at probably, I think, 5 p.m. Pacific time.
All right, this Friday at 5 p.m. Sean, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time, and I look forward to maybe speaking with you again. And for all of you watching at home, thank you very much for watching tonight. I hope that we will be back. I hope that maybe my inner Doc Brown is going to decide to take us down the stream in which we do this again. So thank you all very much. Everybody have a very good night.